Good evening, and welcome to the Cabinet of Fever Dreams. Tonight, a tale of paintings, fire, and a machine. Vernerzeig Studio is read to you tonight by me, Mike J. Langer, with musical backing by the Dark Side of Music. If you want to help the spooky channel burn bright in the dark abyss of the YouTube algorithm, please comment FIRE and hit that like button. Also, if you'd like to hear these stories early and help keep the flame alive, drop by patreon.com/MikeJLanger. All your support is greatly appreciated. With all that said, make sure your subway ticket is validated. It's time to descend. Oh, Elliot, I apologize dearly for being late. The bus, the tram, the whole of Prague seems to have conspired against us meeting at a timely fashion. I thought I would burst a blood vessel waiting for the 174. The timetables in the city seem to be wholly improvised. If it wasn't for Google Maps, I would have made it here even later. But look at me, blabbering about bus schedules when I have not seen my dear friend for over a season. Elliot, how are you? Tell me of your exploits. How I got here? Well, 20 minutes late, my dear friend, but how I got here? In a concrete sense? I rode a bus to Anjel, and from there I took a tram over the bridge. The same tram, mind you, that had an unfortunate convergence with one of those cursed electric scooters. Damn city government needs to tighten their leash before someone loses a limb. I pray you don't take my tardiness too much to heart, Elliot. In fact, to lessen the burden, let me buy the first round. I still live in Prague 13. Yes, I'm used to the jeers. Not real Prague, they say. Well, where is a man working on an artist's salary to live? The panel houses are peaceful, and I do not have to contend with the screaming tourists in the summer. I am happy where I am. But yes, I still live a distance away. Yet for a chance to meet with you, Elliot, no distance is too great. Let us drop the subject. Tell me how... The subway? Yes, my journey could have been expedited into but 15 minutes if I rode the subway. I chose not to ride it. Elliot, I once again profusely apologize for making you wait, but it seems to me, and I pray this is purely phantasm on my part, that you are trying to steer this conversation towards something very specific. Have you, perchance, been talking to that Dutch snake Van Open? Has he, perhaps, told you stories about me? Damn him. You needn't say a word, Elliot. I am good at reading faces. Van Open is a scoundrel with a mouth full of lies. One day that man will get hit so hard he'll pack his bags and go back to swimming in the hate canals. Curse him and all he does and says. Yes, it is true. I no longer ride the subway. It inspires within me an unbearable discomfort which I wish to avoid at all costs. Reason? Oh, Elliot, can we not talk of other things? We are both, after all, men of art. There are so many interesting discussions to... Don't say a word, Elliot. I am good at reading faces. I know there is no dissuading you. Do not think that I will buy you a drink for bringing me to a trap, however. In fact, if you want to hear the full truth, I will require my drinking expenses covered. I never told the Dutchman the reason. He simply observed I had an aversion to the underground and found that alone to be entertaining enough to warrant a rumor. I would swear you to secrecy, Elliot, but I trust your judgment enough. If you ever see Van Open spreading slanderous lies about why I avoid escalators and eschew all trains, do not hesitate to correct the record. The man has the brain of an imbecile, so I am sure whatever explanations he dreams up will be laughable. But it is better to be on the side of righteous truth than on the side of swindling lies. Aside from defending my honor, though, Elliot, please do not spread my story further. The tale is horrible, and frankly, not suited for civilized company, but it might also arouse the attention of the authorities, and that I could not abide. I wish to leave the past in the past and move on with my life. You see, Elliot, the reason I fear the subway is not just a horrible story. It is also, I am fairly certain, connected to the disappearance of our mutual friend, Victor Vernerzeig. Keep your voice down, Elliot. The bartender here serves a cold, cheap pilsner, but they are not ones for shouting. Especially not the names of such tenor. But yes, even after a little metropolitan society of the artistically inclined snubbed the man, I stayed in touch with Victor Vernerzeig. His beliefs were undoubtedly vile and belonged not to the century or to the century past, but you know me, Elliot. I am no sunflower child. On the contrary, I am a slave to the brush, and I will follow all who can teach me how to wield it with skill. The views which Vernerzeig would proclaim on the purity of blood and equality of sexes and certain salient historical facts deserve to be, at the very least, ignored. Yet when the man spoke of art, I was his most rapturous audience. For Prague, and perhaps Europe as a whole, has never seen such a skilled craftsman as Victor Vernerzeig. Do you recall the first night at the Spider's Lounge? When all we knew of Vernerzeig was purely by his creations and not by his theories? Oh, how those crowds chattered. Oh, how they wanted to meet him. Even the snake Van Open, who I have never heard utter a complimentary word to anyone but dogs, said that he would like to buy the artist a drink. There's very few things that I can agree on with that Dutch troglodyte, but Vernerzeig's genius was certainly one of them. There was something about those paintings, be they the cloudy city landscapes or morose portraits, that cut straight to one's soul. The brushwork, the balance of light and darkness and color and composition, those were all flawless. Yet flawless craftsmanship can be learned. A gifted artist needs not much practice, at least in comparison to one lacking all vision. Yet, I believe, with enough repetition, even the most dim of minds can be brought to create functional art. Vernerzeig's art, however, was not just the masterwork of craft. It elevated itself well above the conventionally attractive with untouchable discomfort rooted in horrid inspiration. Now, Elliot, I know that what we saw in the Spider's Lounge was but a tiny fraction of the artistic depravity Vernerzeig was capable of, but even then, I knew that I was witnessing the work of a titan. When Victor entered the lounge, he entered a newly forged celebrity. I tried my best to push past all the admirers, but as you can see, Elliot, I do not possess a fighting body. For much of the night, I sat at the bar, sipping on depressants, hoping to either bolster my spirits, to cut through the conversation, or to bring myself forgetfulness. I, of course, had to do neither. When Victor started to speak on the topic of ethnicity and skulls and burdens, the crowd quickly dissolved and I had my chance to speak with the man privately. Do not give me that look, Elliot. I've spent 2 months following around Baurova to comprehend her composition and tolerated Cleric's terrible smell while I picked his brain for his theory of color. Even spending time with that sea urchin, Van Open, has given me a glimpse into how he crafts motion where there is none. None of these characters would, of course, provide any arguments in favor of ethnic cleansing, but the point still stands. For knowledge of technique, Elliot, I am willing to expose myself to many unpleasant things. A great many unpleasant things. I was prepared to listen to hours of nonsensical phrenology and impotent rants about the hierarchy of races, but Elliot, to truly comprehend Vernerzeig, I had to witness something much, much worse. Once he was banned from the Spider Lounge and all the other establishments where artists congregate, I took to calling on Vernerzeig at his home on Paris Street. Paris Street. Yes, Elliot, how can you be surprised? You know as well as I do that the tenor of Vernerzeig's beliefs is only held by the exceedingly poor and the lavishly rich. Vernerzeig, with his polished cane and three-piece suits, belonged to the latter category with no doubt. Vernerzeig's wealth was generational. He didn't speak too much of his ancestry, for he was too preoccupied prodding the ancestry of others, but with a little research, I found his family to be a noteworthy name of industry. It is with their money that he afforded his Paris Street apartment. It is with their money that he... Well, I'll get to that shortly. The facade was decorated with cherubs and gold, yet Vernerzeig's home was all but luxurious. The only place in which one could take a seat was a worn-out couch, and the kitchen contained nothing but an espresso machine and empty packages of couriered food. The rest of the space was taken up by paintings. Horrible paintings. Paintings which were wholly different from the ones I witnessed at the Spider Lounge, but, in their own right, significantly more disturbing. They depicted strange rural scenes of folk that straddled the line between man and beast. Though these suffering figures were dressed like medieval peasantry and stood on 2 feet and had human faces, there was something distinctly rat-like about them. A certain beadiness of the eye, a misshape in the tooth. The features weren't wholly discomforting on their own, but When the figures were taken as a whole, there was an eerie chill about them. What's more, the scenes depicted in the oil paintings were harrowing beyond comfort. The images seemed to tell some sort of a tale of great suffering. On one, a starving family of those strange folks gathered around a diseased field. In another, a frail old man was holding the hand of his long-dead wife. In another, a fat-faced man in tattered robes of nobility hung strung up by his neck. The images depicted made, even me, a hardy man of art who has seen his share of demented works, uncomfortable. What broke my discomfort into sheer terror, however, was that the paintings moved. Well, not exactly moved. Words escape me here, Elliot. They existed and breathed and suffered in a way wholly indescribable. Though they sparked fear in my heart, they also set aflame a roaring fascination. I demanded to know how Vernerzeig had achieved such strange mixture of shadows and presence, yet at my questions, the man simply laughed. They were not his paintings. It was simply a collection he had amassed over the past couple of months from a promising artist out east. He too found the paintings to be fascinating in their style, but Vernerzeig kept none of his own work in the house. Some of the paintings, which he considered to be mere practice and of no engagement of his skill, he lent to establishments such as the Spider Lounge. The work he was proud of, however, Vernerzeig said, he kept at a studio. At the mention of a studio, I, of course, insisted access, but in response, the man just laughed. The studio was off limits to all but his closest friends, and he barely knew me. I was only invited to his domicile for coffee and conversation. For 3 weeks, Elliot, I visited that crowded apartment. His brew was bitter and his conversation was even more so. The paintings on the walls must have been rotated regularly, for they were never the same. The motifs still revolved around a strange, suffering peasantry, yet the characters seemed to have aged with each visit. They seemed more broken with each visit. My fascination with Vernerzeig's paintings exposed in the Spider Lounge was ultimate, yet as the weeks dragged on, I forgot their eerie splendor. The rad paintings too had lost their charm. Whilst I still found the technique and spirit of the paintings to be stimulating, whatever interest I had dissipated in the impression that the longer I watched the strange folk, the deeper their suffering got. I'd steeled myself in a resolve that I would cut Vernerzeig just as the rest of artistic society did, but on that final day of bitter drinks, as if he could sense me slipping away, Vernerzeig met me in the hall with work of his own. When he said the pieces exposed in the Spider's Lounge were some of his poorest work, I thought his words to be playful arrogance. Yet Vernerzeig was nothing but right. Compared to the piece which he shewed me in his Paris Street apartment, all his previous works seemed like the scribbles of a child. The painting depicted the Church of Our Lady before the Teen from the Old Town Square, not a 5-minute walk away from Vernerzeig's apartment. The masses of tourists were gone, and even though the architecture seemed proportional, there was a terrible weight to it, as if the city were about to sink into the ground at any moment. The painting was a masterclass in perception and composition, but that was not what took my breath away, Elliot. What truly filled my heart with terror and fascination was a wholly incomprehensible quality of the painting. When viewed head-on, the frame held an empty scene from the city of Prague. With a blink or a squint or just a momentary glance at the canvas, however, Elliot, the city was on fire. I cannot explain it, even now. When first faced with the bizarre optical illusion, I was left wholly speechless and had to seat myself on a ratty couch to regain my composure. The man took great pleasure in my discomfort. As I stared at the painting, desperately moving my mouth in effort for words, Vernerzeig laughed. He laughed a horrid, malicious, venomous laugh. As if my fear, as if the burning inferno that flashed across the oil paints, as if it was all the funniest joke to him. When I finally gathered my senses enough to ask him how he achieved such an effect, he told me, with a great sadistic grin, that it was a matter of inspiration, a matter of light and environs and subject, but most of all, a matter of inspiration. And in no such place was there as much inspiration as there was in Vernerzeig's secluded studio. I begged, Elliot. I never got on my knees, but I contorted on that couch like a man in sickness. I clasped my hands and promised my eternal gratitude. He took great pleasure in my begging, and he prolonged it for as long as he could. It wasn't until my desperation started to turn to anger that he finally scoffed and relented. I could take a peek at his studio. I was to meet Vernerzeig at the Moostek subway station by the remnants of the bridge the following evening. I was to dress in a manner which would attract no attention. I did not sleep that night, for my mind ran wild with attempts to explain Vernerzeig's strokes. I wondered of the paints and canvas and man all until morning. It was only once the sun was well in the sky that I relented myself to shallow sleep. When I woke, a few hours later, I felt groggy and unrested. Those few hours of shut-eye, however, would be the best sleep I would get for the next month. Elliot, perhaps we can leave this story for another night. Look how my hand quivers. It is as if my body is still shaken by what I witnessed in Vernerzeig's studio. My mind, perhaps, too, is less healed than I would have liked to believe. If you'll insist I continue, and judging by your face you will, fine, but I will ask that you pour me something stronger. Tell the bartender to bring us some cognac. Not any of the cheap stuff. My pain is great and I require appropriate medicine. Do you know of the old bridge in the Moostek station, Elliot? Ha. What do you foreigners know of our fine city? The old bridge is from whence the Moostek station gets its name. You do know that Moostek means little bridge in the local tongue, yes? Don't say a word, Elliot. I can read a face very well. The short history lesson is in order. The old stone bridge used to connect up the old town of Prague and the new town of Prague back in the 16th century. When the moat, which the bridge spans across, was filled in the late 18th century, the bridge was forgotten by both man and time. It wasn't until the year 1976 that the Gothic wonder was uncovered during the construction of the subway. You see, Elliot, Prague has been around for well over a millennium, and as the centuries piled on, the city grew to cover its past. The history books say the city rose to combat the floods. Perhaps that is true. If you call the river Vltava by her primordial name, Wild Ahwa, it translates from primitive Germanic to wild water. Proven by history, the Vltava can be cruel, but I think there was something else driving Prague from its roots. There is a darkness beneath the city. The ground through which the subway runs, Elliot, should have been left untouched. I arrived at the old bridge at 8 o'clock sharp. That, to me, was evening enough. I was sleepless, but filled with an artist's hunger. Such strong was my desire to learn the secrets of Vernerzeig's technique that I nearly broke my legs rushing down the stairs. I was restless with fascination. I wanted an immediate reveal, yet I was forced to wait. The first hour was the easiest. It passed in a snap. As time piled on, however, its passage became sluggish. I was nearly ready to give it all up and go drown my disappointment back at the spider. But then, I felt a hand on my shoulder. The shock, Elliot. At first I thought I was being assailed by a vagrant. I was nigh ready to swing my fists and shout with all my might. Then I recognized the figure. It was Victor Vernerzeig. Yet instead of his three-piece suit, he wore a filthy hoodie. His cane was replaced with a worn can of Kozel, and his long locks were matted beyond recognition. But in disguise and silence, he spoke to me. Vernerzeig told me to follow him and to keep a distance. So I did. I expected the studio to be near the subway. Yet the moment we rose the stairs, Vernerzeig led me to another set of stairs, which took us to the yellow line. On the escalators, Vernerzeig nearly toppled a crowd of drunken Brits, and I nearly lost my hat when I leaped after him into the subway carriage. We rode, at a distance from each other, in the direction of Zlichyn. I was wholly lost as to where we were going, and Vernerzeig vacated his seat whenever I approached him. It wasn't until the station of Smíchovské nádraží that he acknowledged my existence. It was with a simple nod to get off the carriage. We had arrived. Elliot, look at my hand. Look at how it shakes. Perhaps we can leave this conversation for another time, for a calmer... Fine. I will not argue with that expression. But Elliot, have the bartender bring us 2 more glasses. If I am to continue with this tale, I need to soothe my soul. While he pours, do you know how the name of Smíchovské nádraží translates to English? The Station of Laughter. No, Elliot, I am not joking. They say that the name comes from an old legend from the days of kings and emperors. A knight was to be beheaded at the high castle for disrespecting the king. Before his sentence was carried out, however, he asked for one last ride on his horse. The knight forced the horse to leap from the top of the high castle down to the river below. The animal died on the spot, but they say that on quiet evenings, if the air is still and your ears are sharp, you can still hear the knight laughing in victory. What I found in Smíchovské nádraží, however, is no laughing matter. What I found was... here comes the bartender. Na zdraví, Elliot. Bůh požehnej nám. Vernerzeig walked out of the carriage and onto the platform, and I followed him. He led me to a door. I care not remember exactly where that door was, for I never planned to enter it again. It was but a short walk, and no stairs were taken. The door led to a tightly dim hallway that smelled faintly of mildew. Now that we were alone, I called out to Vernerzeig. The man didn't even turn his head. It wasn't until we were standing in a freight elevator at the end of the hall that he acknowledged my presence. In the flickering fluorescence of the old freight elevator, I could see madness dancing across his face. He did not greet me or comment on where we were descending to. Instead, Vernerzeig spoke of fire. At first, he spoke of it in abstract terms, of the mystery of it, of how it elevated man from an uncivilized animal to a being of knowledge. Vernerzeig spoke of how the fires that burnt in Alexandria, the fires that ate up the steppe in Dornod, how they differ on a basic metaphysical level from the childish bonfires we cook our sausages over, or the pitiful flame that a gas stove emits. You see, Elliot, the Vernerzeig family has long held a searing interest into the nature of fire. For over a century, they had experimented in corners of science not accepted by polite society. They discovered, with great certainty but little specifics, that fires are not mere exothermic reactions dictated by the known laws of physics. With breathless fascination and malice in his eyes, Vernerzeig insisted that fires are portals to a realm wholly incomprehensible to man. That rusty elevator, as we descended, I considered the man's theories to be pure fantasy, yet now, as we sit here, Elliot, I would wager all I have to say that there was truth to the madman's words. For the place to which we descended, for the location of Vernzeig's secret studio, was the site of a failed experiment on the nature of flame. Well before the doors of the freight elevator creaked open, the air was assailed by an overwhelming stench of smoke. Though in the dim light I saw no wisps, it quickly became clear to me where the source of Vernerzeig's strange cough stemmed from. No man who would spend an extended period of time in that poisonous lair could emerge healthy. Descending in that elevator, however, I had no concern for my own well-being. I was far too hungry for knowledge of Vernerzeig's technique. I was a glutton for secrets, and soon, for my cravings, I would be punished. The doors of the freight elevator pulled apart to reveal a ruined factory. I am not one for the cold world of engineering, but if I was to guess, the machinery had been damaged in some sort of an explosion. The conveyor belts and instruments were melted and shattered, but I did not spend long inspecting them, for on the charred walls hung paintings which seized my attention and chilled me to my core. When Vernerzeig labeled his work from the Spider's Lounge to be some of his worst, it was not an exaggerated boast or joke. It was a clinical fact. These paintings, Elliot. Oh, these paintings. They made me forget the smell and melted machinery and the sheer insanity of the studio's location. I was wholly and unapologetically consumed by the art. Words cannot describe it. If I were to tell you that the paintings depicted quaint scenes of modern Prague, of the streets of Žižkov at night, or the tram lines of Holešovice in deep winter, or the view from Letna in the summer heat, that would do it no justice. If I told you that these masterful pieces were painted in a style that married realism with a dark sort of Art Nouveau, as if Mucha had dispensed of his bright colors in exchange for utter despair. Then, maybe, with a dose of imagination, you might begin to merely comprehend a fraction of the craftsmanship. You see, Eliot, much like the painting I had witnessed in his Paris Street loft, the creations Vernerzeig hung around the abandoned factory floor had an unfathomable quality when viewed for a prolonged period of time. On first sight, the landscapes were simply empty city streets, but, and this effect seemed to strengthen with my utter fascination, they were also aflame. The city, taken as a whole, was burning in the images, yet I could find no single trace of red on the canvas. When I demanded Vernerzeig tell me how he achieved such an effect, he would snort and remind me that a painting is a matter of inspiration, and, to a certain extent, good lighting. The ill fluorescence in the main hall scarcely lit up his pictures, but when I questioned them, Vernerzeig laughed and said there was another light under which he practiced his art. Much brighter light. A light he would show me soon enough after I had my fill of his paintings. Eliot, I cannot understate the haunting nature of the art on display and how much of it there was to soak in, yet my hunger for answers quickly drew me towards Vernerzeig's true source of vision. See the sweat that gathers above my brow, Eliot? The radiator next to me is dormant. I have long removed my coat. The sweat, my dear friend, is my body's rejection of what I saw. Yes, another glass is in order. Just look at my hand. But might I suggest we also step outside for a breath of fresh air? I trust that you still smoke and that you're still inclined to provide me with my comforts. Now, careful with the drinks. Just tuck them under your coat. The bartender does not take kindly to glass being taken outside. The machine. That's what he called it. It stood dormant at the far end of the ruined factory. It didn't even register its shape in the darkness. It wasn't until Vernerzeig flipped a switch on the wall that the contraption became visible to me. A face of jagged metal with its jaw broken loose by a mighty force. At the gullet of this disturbing metal head sat an array of nozzles which emitted flames. Only a few of the fire emitters were functional, but they were enough to light up the eyes of that horrid iron face. Out of pure self-preservation, I looked away from the burst of heat. Vernerzeig, however, took great offense at me shielding my face. He grabbed me, savagely, and insisted that I stare into the mouth of that eldritch contraption. He shouted, past the steady increasing roar of the inferno, that if I was to comprehend this art, I would have to see what sat in the fire. The heat was nigh unbearable, but I steeled myself. I watched the flames, and, at first, I thought myself strong to bear the blistering fever spreading through the hall. Yet the searing pressure against my skin quickly became the least of my worries. Eliot, there was something in those flames. Something alive, or perhaps more than alive, something that defied all logic and sense. Yet I saw it. I saw it move, and somewhere deep in my gut, somewhere at the core of my genetics, I knew the beast that stirred within the flames was something which should not be seen by man. Yet I fought against my instincts. I kept my eyes set on the burning machine, hoping to comprehend that which is incomprehensible. I watched the beast, with the flames shift and grow and burn even brighter with each moment. 2 blue balls of light rose from the bottom of the flames. They traveled through the throat and up towards the holes where the machine's eyes would be. It wasn't until the beast of flame looked back at me that I truly lost my mind. Vernerzeig tried to restrain me further, but in pure, primal panic, I struck the man in the nose. As I sprinted towards the freight elevator, I expected Vernerzeig to chase me, or at least to curse me for the bodily harm, but he didn't. Instead, Vernerzeig laughed. He laughed with such malice and force that I could hear his mad cackles past the roaring of the flame and the grinding of the elevator. Well, after the smell of smoke dissipated and the familiar scent of mildew filled my nostrils, I could still hear the lunatic howl with laughter. It is but a few moments after I scrambled out of the subway station that I met Von Open. He was reading a book, waiting for a carriage to take him in a Cherny Moss direction. Had I been more composed, he wouldn't have even noticed me. Yet composed I was not. Elliot, I was a blabbering, shaken mess. I know I may not seem the most composed to you right now, with the sweat and the quiver in my hands and the tears, but the state I was in when I first fled that horrible place would make my current condition seem the definition of copacetic. I believe the Dutchman asked me to accompany him on the subway so that we might grab a drink at the Spider. I told the man I no longer ride a subway and wanted to leave it at that. You, of course, know Van Open. The Dutchman does not let things rest. I do not recall exactly what I said to Van Open, and I do not care to try to remember. Either way, I certainly made enough of an impression to warrant him spreading news of my phobia. No, Elliot, it's not just Smíchovské nádraží that is off limits to me. It is the entirety of the underground. What I saw, down in that ruined hall, I wish to steer as clear of it as possible. If I never descend beneath the ground level of the city for the rest of my life, I shall die a happy man. Or, at least, a sane man at any rate. And of Vernerzeig's disappearance? I guess I heard of it before the news properly spread. After the horrible scene on the ground, I never visited the man or attempted to speak to him. I had seen enough, and I had resolved to never involve myself with him again. It wasn't until weeks later, while I was recovering from my nervous bout in the mountains of Slovakia, that I was contacted by the authorities. It was Vernerzeig's doorman that alerted the police to my existence, and I presume it was someone from the Spider Lounge that passed on my number. I did admit that Vernerzeig and I had spent some time together, but I dared not tell them of his studio. They questioned me when I came back to Prague, and for a brief moment I thought they had some suspicion about me being connected to his disappearance, but the matter was eventually dropped. Elliot, I would also suggest we drop the matter as well now. You see how this story has worked me up into a state, and, although I endured it for you, and for the sake of truth, there is nothing left to tell. Let us return to our table and speak of better times. What I think happened to Vernerzeig? Oh, Elliot, can we just drop the subject? I don't know. I don't know, and I do not care to wonder. Perhaps he simply decided to leave the country without telling anyone. Maybe the fumes from his studio finally got to him, or perhaps he decided to join the beast of fire in its own realm. I do not know, and I will not speculate. Oh, finish your cigarette. It's getting cold outside. I didn't bring out my coat.